Before Rome, before the gods of kings, there was a city that burned in the night. Its name was Troy. There are stories not for the hasty. There are tragedies not meant to warn, but to remind us that honor, love, and pride are three fires that can easily burn down a civilization. Over 3,000 years ago, between the valleys of Anatolia and the copper-red ocean, there was a rich kingdom where men believed that the gods still walked the earth. And it was there that a golden apple fell, not from a tree, but from the envy of the gods. A war that lasted 10 years, where there were no real winners, where heroes died like dust and oaths turned to swords. A war born not of hatred, but of a promise of love, and a stratagem in the shape of a wooden horse. I don't tell this story to glorify victory. I tell it to remind you that it's the little things, a kiss, a promise, a look, that can bring down a great city. If you are ready, enter an era where the gods are jealous of mankind, and humans never suspect that they are just pawns on the chessboard of fate. The Curse of the Golden Apple. In the early days of the world, when gods still roamed Mount Olympus and men raised their heads to hear thunder like the voice of Zeus, there was a wedding that caught the attention of the universe. The wedding of Peleus, a mortal king, and Thetis, a sea goddess who would later give birth to the greatest warrior of all, Achilles. All the gods were invited, except Eris, the goddess of discord. In her silent rage, Eris did not scream, did not curse, she simply dropped a golden apple on the banquet table, on which was engraved the words, "For the most beautiful." The hall fell silent. And then came the first sigh, from Hera, queen of the gods, wife of Zeus. The sneer, from Athena, goddess of wisdom and strategy. And the proud glare of fire, from Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty. The apple was no longer an object. It was a spark, a double-edged sword, and the seed of a decade of bloodshed. No one dared to judge between the three goddesses. Zeus, with the wisdom and survival instinct of a lord, cleverly declined. Let a mortal judge. A human, one not bound by divine loyalty. And so Paris, the prince of Troy, who was living in seclusion on Mount Ida as a shepherd, was chosen. He did not know that his single nod would set his city, his homeland, his blood, his family ablaze in the future. The three goddesses came like three winds, a storm, a rain, and a whirlwind of fire. Hera promised, "I will give you power to be king of all Asia." Athena whispered, "I will give you wisdom. No one will defeat you in any battle or argument." And Aphrodite just smiled and said, "I will give you the most beautiful woman in the world." Paris, like any young man with a dreamer's heart rather than a practical mind, gave the apple to Aphrodite. The woman was Helen, wife of King Menelaus of Sparta. Her beauty lay not in her features, but in her eyes, which made men forget their loyalty, and in her voice, which could draw swords without reason. Paris had come to Sparta as a guest, but he left, taking Helen with him, and with him the wrath of all Greece. Menelaus had lost more than his wife. He had lost his dignity. And in those days, a king who had lost his dignity meant a nation that had lost its honor. He appealed to his brother, Agamemnon, king of Mycenae, who was ambitious and waiting for a reason to declare war. They called upon Odysseus, the most cunning man in the land of Ithaca. They persuaded Achilles, the greatest warrior in Greece, to join the Myrmidon army. They assembled thousands of ships, carrying tens of thousands of warriors, from lands as far away as Thessaly, Boeotia, to the dusty grasslands of Argos. They did not come for Helen. They came for honor, for glory, for greatness. And because it was impossible for a mortal like Paris to think he could touch what even the gods fought for, beauty. 10,000 white sails were raised high in the Aegean. The waves beat against the ships like drums of death. The battle was preordained. And it all began because of an apple. Paris and the kiss of Aphrodite. From the moment Paris gave the golden apple to Aphrodite, his fate was no longer his own. A promise had been made, and now it was time to fulfill it. In the mythical mists surrounding Mount Ida, Aphrodite appeared as nothing more than a goddess. No thunderbolts, no crown, no symbols of power. She appeared as the most beautiful woman ever born, but her eyes contained an ocean that was never quiet. "You have chosen me," she said, "and I will not let you regret it." Paris looked at her, not sure if it was infatuation, fear, or awe. But he did not know that, in that very moment, his heart was weighed in the scales of fate. Under the protection of Aphrodite, Paris was sent by his father, King Priam, as an envoy to Sparta, under diplomatic pretext. Troy, at that time, was still at peace and prosperous. No one suspected the prince's true intentions with his far-sighted eyes. Paris arrived in Sparta on an autumn day. The city was at the foot of a hill. The sky was blue and the wind blew from the sea, carrying the scent of salt and wild flowers. King Menelaus welcomed him with great respect, like a brother from the Far East. And then he met her Helen. Helen entered the room not as a king's wife, but as a goddess from a legend. She was not beautiful in the way that palaces' splendor would. She was beautiful in the way that all the lights in the room had to be dimmed to let her own light shine. Paris had never believed in love at first sight. Until then. Helen was different. She was a woman accustomed to admiring glances, but Paris's gaze was different from others. It was not pleading, not worshipping, but like someone who had found a forgotten poem in the desert. During their days in Sparta, they exchanged more glances than words. And it was Aphrodite who arranged the opportunities, the breezes that fluttered Helen's skirts, the afternoons when Menelaus was absent from court, the touching of fingers as they raised their glasses. The last night in Sparta, the sky was red as an omen. Helen stood on the balcony looking out at the sea. Paris walked over as light as a breeze. No one said anything. There was only silence and a trembling in the air. And then they kissed. That kiss did not carry the sweetness of young love. It carried pain, destruction, like a gate opening for thousands of souls to pass through without being able to turn back. From afar, Aphrodite stood in the form of an ordinary young girl, smiling, not because love had come, but because the deal had been completed. That night, Helen quietly left the palace, carrying only a few jewels and her burning heart. They boarded a small boat that had been prepared, and as the wind filled the sails, they looked at each other, unaware that they had just dragged an entire world toward the abyss. They did not know, or did not want to know, that Menelaus would never forgive. That Agamemnon would use this to declare war. That Odysseus would devise a plan that would make Troy untenable forever. And that 10,000 sails had begun to be raised, for a kiss. On Mount Olympus, the gods watched it all. Zeus said nothing. Hera and Athena quietly withdrew from the banquet. They had been insulted, and they would not let this pass as a minor scratch on their pride. Ares, the god of war, laughed, for he smelled blood. Poseidon, the god of the sea, began to stir the waves. And Hades, down in the earth, opened the gates of the underworld, for he knew that soon the souls would come pouring in. 10,000 ships. When Helen disappeared with Paris, it was not just one man who lost his wife. An entire coalition of Greek kings felt insulted by an act they saw as an insult of the East to the West. Menelaus, in his rage, did more than smash the banquet table and swear revenge. He went to Mycenae, to his powerful brother, Agamemnon, the king of kings, who was always looking for an excuse to expand his power. In the great hall of the black stone castle, Menelaus said only one sentence. "He has taken my wife. He has taken the honor of us all." Agamemnon did not need to hear more. He ordered the vassals to assemble, the oaths that had been signed at Helen's marriage, that any suitor who was not chosen would swear to protect the husband she chose, no matter what. That oath now served as an excuse to raise a whirlwind of steel. From the coast to the mountains, kings and chieftains flocked to Aulis, which would become the starting point for the greatest campaign in ancient Greek history. Odysseus, the wise king of Ithaca, initially refuses, feigning madness, plowing his fields with salt to escape his obligations, but is exposed and eventually joins, bringing with him his wisdom and a silver sword. Achilles, son of Thetis, was prophesied to die young if he fought, but his name would live on forever. He joined the Myrmidons, his eyes burning like holy fire. Ajax, the strongest after Achilles, shoulders like rocks, shields as big as city gates. Diomedes, Nestor, Idomeneus, all marched to Aulis. And then, more than 1,000 warships, carrying tens of thousands of warriors, were built. But there was a strange thing. The wind did not blow. The Aegean Sea turned to stone, the sails drooped, the souls boiled but were held back by something invisible, as if the gods were punishing them. They went to the temple of Artemis, and the prophet Calchas gave a prophecy. The gods are angry, because King Agamemnon has offended her. To make the wind blow again, the king must sacrifice his daughter, Iphigenia. The whole camp fell silent. Agamemnon was torn, but then he nodded. Iphigenia, a girl not yet 20, tricked into coming to the camp under the pretext of marrying Achilles. When she understood the truth, she did not cry. She only asked her father, "If my blood is the price for your departure, then go, but do not forget that you have killed a daughter to get a wife." As the blade was drawn, the wind rose. The sea roared as if to wash away what had happened. The white sails were raised again, and then 10,000 ships left Aulis. On each ship were men who swore different vows: revenge, glory, hope, madness. Little did they know that it would take 10 years, thousands of corpses, hundreds of sunrises and sunsets, for a city to bleed for a kiss. From the towering walls of Troy, the sentries saw white dots on the horizon, and they knew the siege had begun. Priam, the old but wise king, summoned his generals. Hector, his bravest son, Aeneas, the blood of the gods, and the Trojan warriors stood ready. Paris stood there, looking out to sea. His eyes were no longer those of a lovesick young man, but of one who had sown seeds, and now must reap with the sword. The walls of Troy. As the Greek ships reached the shores of the Troad, the sea was tinged with the red glow of sunset. The army marched down the sand like an angry wave, each step on the wet sand marking its fate on a land that had never known fear. Troy, from afar, stood like a divine fortress. Its stone walls were so high that no light could penetrate them, built by Poseidon, god of the sea, and Apollo, god of light, in a time long ago when the two gods were punished and forced to serve humans. Troy was not a town. It was a petrified dream, a pride, a boast, and the greatest challenge Greece had ever faced. Agamemnon led the army. Achilles and the Myrmidons descended like a whirlwind. Ajax thundered like a hammer into the enemy. The lands outside the city were razed, the food stores were destroyed, Troy's small allies were burned. However, as the Greeks approached the walls, they encountered something no one had anticipated. Troy's walls were impregnable. Arrows rained down from the battlements. Boiling oil was poured from the high walls. Each charge was forced to retreat with hundreds of dead. While Paris lived in the palace with Helen, still dreaming of the breath of love, it was Hector, his brother, who truly shouldered the fate of Troy. Hector had no divine blood, no weapons forged by divine fire, but he was a warrior and a father, a husband, a son, fighting for all he loved. Every time the Greek army approached, Hector led his army out of the city, like a spear breaking the arrow of fate. He did not wait in silence. He fought back with fire, with blood, with eyes that had never known fear. Every day, the sun rose and set on either side of the wall. Every night, the fires of the Greek camp lit up the sky. And every day, more people died, and the walls of Troy remained unbroken. The gods began to split. Hera and Athena, offended by Paris's choice of Aphrodite, sided with Greece. Apollo and Aphrodite defended Troy, because love and light were not yet willing to leave the city. Ares, the god of war, now stood in the middle, drunk on blood and the clash of steel. Amidst the thousands of shouts, Odysseus did not shout. He observed. He remembered. He did not believe in impregnable walls, only in poor planning. He told Agamemnon, "We don't need to break down the walls. We just need to let them open the gates." But Agamemnon did not listen. He believed in strength, in numbers. And so the battle continued, day after day, year after year. War does not kill with swords. It kills with waiting, with doubt, with forgetting its original purpose. Many have forgotten that they came here for Helen. Many have come to love the light reflected on the blade more than her name. And on the wall, Helen looked down. Her eyes were no longer dreamy. She began to understand. She was no longer love, but a symbol of death. Achilles and his wrath. There was no more sunlight in the Myrmidon camp. There was only the smoldering fire in Achilles' eyes, and the crunching of sand beneath the feet of the man who had lost everything. Glory was gone. Honor had no more meaning. Only one name echoed in his mind, every night, every breath. Hector. Hephaestus forged Achilles not just a suit of armor, but a shell for the fury of humanity. When Achilles donned it, no one dared to call him a man. His shield bore the images of the world, war and peace, men and women, harvest and mourning. But in the center of it all was a vortex, the image of fate. Achilles did not declare. He did not shout. He just walked out of the tent, like a star falling to the ground. The Myrmidons followed without a word. The dying Greeks saw him and rose. On the battlefield, the Trojans saw him and retreated. For he was not like any other warrior. Every step was a verdict. No one could block Achilles' spear. No one saw his sword strike. He was no longer a fighter, he was death. His arrow went first, his spear followed, blood covered the path. The Scamander River, the spirit of the land, howled as it saw the bodies drifting by every hour. The water was red, demanding Achilles' life. But he shouted at the river, "If you are a god, you know I have not come here to live. I have come here to end." In the end, Hector knew he could not escape his fate. No escape. No hiding. He donned his armor, rode his chariot. The walls were full of men looking down. Priam of his father pleaded. His mother cried. But Hector only smiled. If fate is a sword, I choose to face it rather than kneel. On the sand field, two people face to face. Eyes on each other. No shouts. And then, steel against steel. Hector fought like the last lion in the pack. But Achilles did not fight to win. He fought to punish. The divine spear pierced Hector's neck. Hector fell, but his eyes were still looking up at the sky. Now that you have killed me, I only wish you would die, not in glory, but in solitude like me. Achilles drew his spear. No answer. Not stopping there, Achilles tied Hector's body to a chariot and dragged it around Troy 3 times. Every stone of the wall heard the sound of bones cracking. Helen stood watching, tears falling. Paris clasped his hands. Achilles knew nothing. He knew no mercy, no compassion. He had become a shadow of himself. The cities that bowed their heads. In the world of the Greeks and Trojans, not being buried was the cruelest curse. Priam, the old king, father of Hector, who had once worn a crown before the gods, now walked in ashes into the enemy camp, just to ask for the body of his son. Achilles' chariot continued to drag Hector's body around the walls until the dust covered the skies of Troy. The statues of the gods faded away in silence. The eyes that looked down from the walls no longer shed tears, because their tears had run out. Achilles, for the first time in days, did not scream, did not get angry. He looked at his father bowing before him, and saw his own father, Achilles, in his eyes. He withdrew from his madness, and returned Hector's body. Without a word, Troy held the greatest funeral in its history. Timber was piled as high as the walls. Hector's body was washed in wine and perfume. Fire broke out in the square, the first time a fire had been set ablaze not for a war, but for a man. All Troy bowed. All Greece was silent. Even the enemy bowed before the hero. After Hector's death, the gods disappeared. No more lightning. No more prophecies. No more intervention. They retreated as if they themselves feared what was coming. Odysseus silently took notes. Ajax sat brooding on the cliff. Agamemnon still raised his voice, but few listened. Helen no longer sang. Paris no longer came out of her chamber. And on moonless nights, it was rumored that the gates of Troy began to creak of their own accord, like broken bones. Many years before, the prophet Cassandra, daughter of King Priam, had said, "Walls will not fall by swords, but by misplaced faith." No one believed her. Because she was cursed, she spoke the truth, but no one believed her. Now, Cassandra sat alone in the stone cellar, her eyes empty, occasionally whispering, The horse has no heart." No one understood what she said, but history still recorded it. Things began to loosen. Troy's allies began to retreat. The Lycians, the Dardanians, the Mysians, one by one they went home. They had fought for 10 years. They no longer believed in victory. They had seen Hector dead, and Achilles still alive. Troy was becoming isolated, no longer a center, but only walls and the exhausted souls within. The war was quiet. No one attacked. No one defended. There was only silence, like a bow drawn taut waiting to snap. The reason for fighting began to be forgotten. For Helen? No. Now for ourselves. Or because we can't stop. The children born in Troy had never known peace. They called the drumbeat the heartbeat. They called the smell of iron the smell of baking bread. They called the red sun the morning death. Night of wood and ash. Troy stood firm for 10 years. Through thousands of bodies, through countless attacks. But it was not the sword that brought it down, but the gift. One day, the sun rose later than usual. And then the Greeks retreated. No more drums. No more smoke. No more cheers. They retreated to the shore, boarded ships, and disappeared into the mist. Troy opened the gate. He couldn't believe his eyes. The enemy was gone. In the middle of the sand field, once a hell of blood, a giant wooden horse stood still. No one knew why it was there. It did not move. It had no eyes. It had no heart. An inscription was carved on its body. To Athena, goddess of war, in apology. People of Troy, accept peace. The people of the city were divided. One side said, break it open. There is something inside. The other side, tired of war, whispered, it is a gift from the gods. We must not insult it. Cassandra, the cursed prophet, cried out, it is the belly of the devil. It is the coffin hanging upside down. It is death in horse skin. No one listened. No one ever listened. Under the setting sun, the Trojans pulled the wooden horse into the city. The wooden wheels rolled through the great gates. The stone-paved square made a deep sound. Children ran around the horse, laughing. Old people clapped. Music played. Troy, for the first time in many years, celebrated. In the horse's belly Achilles is not, but Odysseus is, Menelaus is, Neoptolemus Achilles' son is. And silence. Night falls. The feast is over. The wine is gone. The men sleep. The lamps are out. Only the moonlight shines through the city gate. Inside the horse's belly, the Greek warriors wake up. Outside the city, the warships return in silence, thanks to the torch signal of the traitor, Sun. The gate opens from the inside. Screams rang out from the temple of Athena. Blood spilled at the doorway. Neoptolemus slew King Priam in the middle of the altar. Fires blazed from the roof of the library. Greeks poured in like a flood. Helen stood in her room, looking at the mirror, not seeing herself. Paris died without anyone noticing. Cassandra was dragged away like a puppet. People ran, not knowing where to go. Troy, not dying slowly, but shattering like a porcelain vase thrown against a rock. The next morning, the sun rose, but no one called it dawn. Troy was all smoke. The statue of the god had fallen. The city gates were cracked. In the square, the wooden horse still stood, but now it was stained with blood. Odysseus sat on the steps, not happy, just sighing. We won, but I don't know what else to bring back. Ashes and memories. Troy, the city once known as the crossroads of the ancient world, is now a smoldering pile of ashes. No more bells, no more horses, no more forges, no more hawking. There is only the sound of burning wood, the wind blowing through fallen pillars, and the quiet footsteps of the survivors. Women were taken as slaves. Children were herded from their homes like cattle by Greek soldiers. No one cried. No one begged. No one had the strength to feel. Cassandra was dragged away with Agamemnon. Her eyes were empty, but her mouth still whispered. History will remember, but not correctly. Helen walked among the Greek soldiers. Unbound. Unstruck. But all eyes were on her. She was no longer human. She was a curse made flesh. Achilles' son, who had killed King Priam with his bare hands, did not celebrate. He sat on the steps, looking at the smoldering ashes and said, "My father killed Hector. I killed his father. But why does it still feel empty?" No one answered. Odysseus, the wise man, only bowed his head. The one who came up with the wooden horse never sleeps. The ships left Troy, carrying booty, prisoners, and ghosts. The Aegean Sea was a rotten red. The wind did not blow. The moon did not rise. Where there had been music, drums, songs, now there was only the sound of masts whistling in the wind. Menelaus brought Helen back. But that first night in the tent, they did not touch. Agamemnon brought Cassandra back, but he did not know that death awaited him in Mycenae. Odysseus returned to Ithaca, lost for another 10 years, and every night he heard the sound of wooden wheels rolling on stone. No one believed, but he knew. The survivor always carries Troy in his head. No one talks about the Trojan War in the squares of Athens or Sparta. No one wants to talk about it again, because it was not a victory. It was a demonstration of the defeat of gods and men. Athena did not laugh. Zeus did not give praise. Apollo was silent. Olympus closed its doors to the clouds. Time passed. Ashes covered the grass. Bricks grew moss. But there were those who sang. Wandering poets, blind men like Homer, who heard only the stories and sang. Tell me, goddess, of the wrath of Achilles. Troy disappeared, but the song remained, and those who heard sighed.